information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. The D.C. Nurses Association says despite winning an arbitration award for $4.1 million in unpaid raises for nurses going back to 2013, the union has been informed that the District of Columbia will not certify the money to pay the nurses. The nurses work at United Medical Center, a public health facility of Washington, D.C. Walla Blagay is the staff attorney for the D.C. Nurses Association. She says nurses are dealing with mismanagement that has contributed to unsafe nurse-patient ratios, in addition to not being paid the wages owed.
Our nurses are working in a very unsafe environment. Many of the nurses feel overwhelmed with high nurse-patient ratios where they're looking at quite a bit of patients with chronic conditions, and they feel overwhelmed. They don't feel this supported. This management that just lost the contract, we're not supportive of nurses. So these nurses are reaching their end. We're going to have to make some moves.
Blagay said before Veritas lost its management contract at United Medical Center, there were many issues, but the D.C. City Council was still going to move forward paying a management contract before paying the $4.1 million owed to the nurses. That contract was since denied, but Blagay says it's indicative of what labor is facing across the board in America.
This is not new to labor. We're seeing more and more of this where management companies, you see here there's a priority where it's like, okay, you have these nurses working in a very unsafe environment. You're not paying attention to them. You don't even listen to their concerns. And now you're not going to pay them, but yet you're going to give contract raise to a management company who's shown to be ineffective. This is about priorities here and not really about the lack of certification of funds.
Public Citizen says Trump's nomination of Big Pharma executive Alex Azar as the next Secretary of Health and Human Services shows Trump isn't serious about reining in high prescription drug prices. Trump claims this guy, Azar, would be a star who will lower prescription drug prices, but Azar was president of Eli Lilly USA. Public Citizen says under Azar's watch, 6 million diabetic Americans had their insulin prices more than tripled by Eli Lilly. Public Citizen says that the price of Humalog went up 345%, and now Trump wants the guy who presided over that huge price spike for a life-saving medicine to be in charge of U.S. Health and Human Services. Public Citizen says if Azar is confirmed, then, quote, Big Pharma's coup d'etat in the healthcare sphere will be virtually complete, end quote. WIN is America's multimedia news voice for workers. Support WIN's worker news mission at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the
I want to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Lots to get to today, and what a day it was. What fun, what enjoyment, what entertainment as Jeffy took to testify, or as I said earlier, test a lie. I guess what I took from the whole day was, kind of one of those Bill Clinton moments. I did not have sex with that woman. Jeffy's position is, I did not have contact with anybody about Russia, and the people I did have contact with about Russia, I was against. That was basically what we got today. Jeffy on the defense, and interestingly enough, you've got a couple of former prosecutors. Nick Ackerman, one of the former Watergate assistant special prosecutors, he was asked by MSNBC's Ari Melber, did Sessions roll the ball further away from perjury by the way he defended himself? And Ackerman said, no, I think he brought it closer to perjury. He said perjury is a difficult crime to convict people of because you've got to get in that person's mind as to whether they're telling the truth. He said Jeff Sessions has made it a lot easier for a prosecutor. And look, the whole thing, this is one of those moments where, and I forget who the representative was, it'll come to me in a minute, but I forget who he was. He was going, look, back when you were impeaching Bill Clinton, back when you were saying, I'm going to go vote for impeachment, you talked about a young cop that you prosecuted because you said he committed perjury. Although he came back afterwards and corrected his testimony, you still pursued this. He's going, look, you've come back a number of times with a bunch of different stories, and I'm sorry, I don't recall. Maybe worked for Reagan, not here. And interestingly enough, how many bites at the apple of truth do you get? How many times do you get to correct the record before we go, you were lying all along? I mean, is this administration full of 2-year-olds? I mean, honestly and truthfully, and look, I understand these are busy people who have have busy lives, but to take the position of I don't remember Papadopoulos, but if I did meet him and we did talk about Russia, I was against it. Trust me, believe me. I'm not. John Danforth, special counsel who investigated Waco back in the 90s, you may remember, he told the Washington Post, you have the winning side exploring the possibility of prosecuting the losing side in an election. It's un-American and it's grotesque. He said the proliferation of special counsels in a political setting is very, very bad. And look, you've got, and interestingly enough, you had, I think it was Jeffers from Ohio, who was, badgering, Sessions to appoint a special prosecutor to go after Hillary Clinton. And again, their obsession with Hillary Clinton, it's over. It's over. I know, lock her up. I get it. Yeah, I got it. And even Jeffy goes, facts kind of matter. We got to have a factual basis to go do this, not just something that we heard. And, it was just kind of interesting to me that when you look at, Jeffy was trying to pretend like he was being honest, and while simultaneously not get himself thrown under the bus himself, while trying not to throw everybody else under the bus. Just bizarre. And here's the weird thing, and this is the really how this hearing just overshadowed everything else. Did you know there was a mass shooting today? Did you know that 5 people, including a couple of kids, were killed in Northern California because some guy just decided, what, I'm having a bad day. They're saying maybe it's domestic violence related, but evidently went off shooting hundreds of shots before the cop downed him. And nothing. Everything was Jeffy, the little lying weasel. And, I got to be honest, Kate McKinnon on Saturday Night Live does an amazing Jeffy. I mean, really, you got to look at it and go, wow, nice job. Got the weasel thing down. And while his testimony's going on, and while all this is going on, and all of this talk about contacts with Russia, and you've still got a president who, you look at the trip overseas, total failure. I was reading the New York Times editorial today, and they were spot on. Look, what is it about this guy and his bowing to dictators? Is it that he sees what he wants to be in them and is effusive with praise because, that's what he would want? I mean, praising, the guy from China and Russia and the Philippines, really? And looking like a total doofus while doing it is going to put us in a really weird. Now, look, I understand you have to play nice. I understand you have to be, somewhat diplomatic, which he is not. I get that. You've got to figure out where you can work with them and do things together. Because look, there are geopolitical forces and things that are going on that you have to figure out how to play the game. But if you're playing the game, you've got to be playing the same game. If you're playing chess, play chess. It's not tiddlywinks. I was going to use checkers, but checkers is close to chess because it's played on a board. Trump's not even on the board. That's how far out of this he is. And the Post was, the Times were spot on in their assessment of him, which is, just delusional. And at some point, you've got to look at this and go, as a country, you can't have this kind of leadership on the foreign stage. Please, generals who are supposed to be keeping this guy in check, you're not doing it. You're failing horribly. There was a bit of hope that Kelly and Mattis and the rest of that little, that little cabal, him and Tillerson and the rest of them, were going to maybe do the babysitting, maybe going to keep an eye on him, maybe make sure that he doesn't do dumb things. Falling down on the job, man. And with all of this chaos and all of this nonsense and all of this distraction, still in Congress, they're moving forward on a horrible tax plan that most of us aren't even talking about. A tax plan that is going to enrich the wildly wealthy like never before, at the expense of people who work for a living, who are angry because they are playing by the rules. They are working their behinds off and they're not getting ahead. And this isn't going to further that aim. It's not going to help. And you got to wonder, at what point do all these distractions, when do we wake up from it? I mean, it's scary, scary times. I'm telling you. And what we're getting from our mainstream media is the shiny stuff. It's, hey, look over here, while all this other stuff is going on. And look, I know it's like drinking from a fire hose. I get it. But at some point, we need to have a media structure in this country that really digs a little deeper. Just a thought, which is why I've asked Wendell Potter on the program. He's the founder of Tarbell. When we come back, I'm going to talk about his new organization, what he's hoping to get out of this, what the idea of, and I saw this not too long ago, solution-driven journalism. We're going to find out what that's all about. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick come back. Wendell Potter's listen to the Rick Smith Show.
There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment's gonna bring the whole thing down. The floodgates are open, we've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1938. That was the day that the National Federation of Telephone Workers was founded in New Orleans, Louisiana. Today, the union is known as the Communication Workers of America and represents 700,000 workers in a wide range of communication fields. Attempts to organize the telephone industry began as early as 1910 by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. By the end of the decade, the the IBEW had more than 200 telephone unions. Growth in the number of union members in the telephone industry was greatly impeded due to World War I. During the war, President Woodrow Wilson issued an order to, quote, hereby take possession and assume control and supervision of each and every telegraph and telephone system, and every part thereof within the jurisdiction of the United States. He placed control of the industry under the authority of the Postmaster General. After the war ended, telephone companies increasingly installed unions as a way to control their workers' organizing efforts. Their aim was to stave off unionism from outside organizations. Nearly all of the IBEW locals lost their membership to company unions. But when Congress passed the Wagner Act in 1935, a new surge of independent unionism began in the telephone industry. In 1938, 31 organizations joined together in New Orleans to form the National Federation of Telephone Workers. It was a loose association of locally independent unions. But by 1947, it became clear that the union would have to form a strong national presence to negotiate with the nationwide companies. And the Communication Workers of America was born. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. You know, we hear an awful lot about, especially today with Donald Trump and the assaults on the quote-unquote crooked media. There's a lot of discussion around, you know, what kind of journalism does a democracy need? What kind of journalism do we as a country need? And here to talk about his idea, this idea of independent journalism, I've asked Wendell Potter to come talk with us. He is the founder of Tarbell. Wendell, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, glad to be on the show again. Thanks so much.
So explain to me, what is Tarbell? What's the grand idea?
Tarbell is a new journalism nonprofit organization. We're going to be investigating corruption, how the system is rigged, but we're not going to be focusing so much on politicians, the people we vote for. We're going to be focusing on those who really hold the power in this country, the big corporations and other special interests that have just buckets of money, and how we'll focus on how they spend it. For example, just tomorrow, we're going to be rolling out a series of articles on the pharmaceutical industry, how they have become so powerful, particularly in Washington, but also in state capitals. They typically spend more every year on lobbying than any other industry, and they almost never lose a policy fight. But it's not just lobbying. They also make a lot of campaign contributions, and they also spend a lot of money with nonprofit groups and disease advocacy groups and think tanks and universities to build allies to make sure that when they need to call in some chits, they've got some allies to call.
Yeah, I mean, they're buying the best democracy money can buy, and you look at the money that they've just thrown around, you're absolutely right. But let me ask you, on the journalism part of this, how do you fund this if you're not going to be getting money from the big pharmaceutical industries? Because, as we know, you turn on any TV channel, it's all filled with, ask your doctor, this might be right for you.
You're exactly right. And we actually have a policy of not accepting any advertising, much less from the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to be entirely reader-funded. In fact, right now we have a crowdfunding campaign that's going on to help us get to being reader-funded. We've raised money so far from individuals and some family foundations to cover our initial startup cost. But our goal is to be, like I said, funded entirely by those who read us. We're not going to have a paywall, but we want to build a community of informed and engaged readers who appreciate the kind of work that we're doing so much that they are willing to pay a certain amount of money on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. And we're getting a very good response. We've gotten so far well over 1,300 people who have signed up or are donating. We've got people from every state in the union, so we're well on the way.
Let me ask you this, because I was looking at your website, and one of the things that jumped out at me was this solutions journalism. I haven't heard that before. You know, I've heard independent journalism, investigative journalism. I've never heard of solutions journalism. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, we're going to be investigating both problems and corruption and solutions. We no, I know, you know, that our problems, they seem to be difficult to solve, but they're not intractable. They can be solved. And we're going to be pointing out how can you how can you solve a problem? How can you tackle, for example, the problems of drug prices going up every single year? What can be done about that? And how can regular people get involved to help make change happen? So we're going to be focusing on reporting solutions. We're going to be focusing, for example, on how the Canadians control drug prices, how the Brits do it, how they do it in France and in Germany, to let people see that it is possible, that other countries are able to control healthcare costs and ensure access to everybody in the country and have better outcomes than we do. But also point out what's happening even in the private sector, what's being done at the state level that's innovative in some way, that's improving access to care or bringing costs down or improving quality of care. We're going to be focusing a lot on healthcare because that's where I come from. I was, as you know, in the health insurance business for a long time until I couldn't do that anymore and left after a crisis of conscience. We're going to be looking at other issues as well, too, that are very important to working people.
You know, in looking at the healthcare thing, because you're right, there are so many opportunities to do things maybe a little bit differently outside of the entrenched special interests like Big Pharma, that it would be refreshing to have those thoughts. But what do you say to the person who's saying, well, you know, maybe by going in this direction, you're serving a different master than the corporate master, and maybe that's not, you know, maybe that's no better at all?
Well, I think that what you have to understand is that we're not going to be advocating for any particular kind of solution. We're going to say this is how it's being done in one place or another. And if you have concerns about the status quo and you want your members of Congress or your state legislator to focus on your needs, and this is how you can become part of the problem yourself. It's going to take a very engaged citizenry if we're going to be able to push forward on some positive changes. We've seen that the special interests have been having their way for so long that's why I'm doing this. It's to call attention to how they get this done. We need to know what our enemy, if you will, how they operate, what they do, so that we can be better equipped to counter what they do.
Now, let me ask you, because I look at this and, you know, you use the word enemy and I think that's so spot on. But you said you wanted an engaged citizenry. And I mean, look, today we're just inundated with so many messages. How do you want people to see this as something different? I mean, look, I get the crowdsourcing, I get the independent reader, you know, funding it, I get that. But how is this, you know, how do you want this to be different than any of the other clickbaiting sites out there trying to grab people's attention and trying to get into their wallets?
Well, first of all, I know that we're not going to be appealing to everybody. There are some people who just fall for the clickbaiting stuff. That's not going to be kind of journalism that we produce. It's going to be journalism that really connects the dots so people can see how this corruption, how this rigged system affects us in our daily lives every single day. How are we affected by rising health insurance premiums and the shift from employers and insurance companies of out-of-pocket medical costs to us? How are we affected by that? So we're going to be connecting the dots, and hopefully we believe there are enough people in this big country that will want to have this kind of quality journalism. And it's not the he said, she said kind of stuff that we see so often on TV that passes for journalism or even in our newspapers. And Rick, also, we've seen a diminishment of real reporting in this country over the past several years. About 60,000 journalists have lost their jobs in the past 20 or so years. And part of what's been lost is this kind of investigative journalism that really helps people understand their world, help people understand how the healthcare system came to be this way and what we can do to fix it.
Yeah, and it's honestly, it's expensive because, you know, I know a bunch of the reporters who have lost their jobs numerous times because it seems to be, you know, every time you find a new gig, you know, it's an unstable situation we have in this country because it's based on, well, you know, which advertiser is going to be interested in buying at this moment. So there's a huge turnover. So the hope is, and if I'm hearing you right, and what I hope comes from this is a much deeper kind of journalism to where you're not just, you're not just touching the surface, you're actually having substantive discussions, which I got to be honest, maybe call me jaded, cynical. I don't know that we as Americans are ready for that. I'm hoping we're thirsting for it, and I'm hoping this takes off, but I don't know we're ready for that kind of deep discussion on how to really solve problems, because I think we're just used to shouting past each other.
We are. And again, I don't think we'll attract 300 million Americans to our site or to read our journalism, but we think we can get a decent percentage of that. And as you well know, it takes sometimes just a small number of people working together to push change forward. And we're on our way to getting a pretty good base of members already. And I think that we'll build on that in years to come. And we've seen this happen in Europe. There have been some very important examples of how this can work in other countries, and we think we can pull it off here. We think there are enough people who are interested and want to get engaged to try to make a difference. Yeah, that's what we're all about.
One of the things I saw on your site, you were talking about Alaska, and to talk about this solutions journalism and the kind of reporting that you're talking about. Dental care in this country is not something that is covered by most insurance. Right. In fact, in a lot of areas, I think of Appalachia as, right off the top of my head, of where, just dental care is not something that's even accessible. And the idea of doing things in maybe a little bit of a different way that other countries have already done. Talk about what you found in Alaska a little bit.
Yeah, in fact, in Alaska, and this started in the Alaska Native communities up there, where oral health care was especially bad. Tribal leaders decided to look outside of this country for solutions, and they found that in 50 other countries there is this mid-level dental practitioner called a dental therapist that is sort of like a nurse practitioner and a physician assistant in dentistry. And they've been able to practice in Alaska now for more than 10 years, and studies are showing that they're making a huge difference in the oral health of people that they serve. And they're now able to practice in Minnesota, and in some places in Oregon and Washington and Vermont. So it's beginning to take hold in the lower 48. But once again, you have resistance to change. And the American Dental Association feels threatened by this, just like the American Medical Association years ago felt threatened by nurse practitioners. But it is I was in Alaska, just as a matter of fact, just last week, and it's just remarkable how these people are trained and what they can do to their communities.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, there are some things you need a dentist for, absolutely, and there are some things that are a step down that you really don't. Yeah. And I think that can go across a bunch of bounds, but I also don't want to undo all of the controls and let it open up to the wild, wild west, if you will.
No, exactly, and dental therapists, they have to practice under the supervision of a dentist, so they're not out on their own in the wild, wild west, so to speak. They report to dentists, and if they encounter a problem that's beyond their scope of practice, they have to refer that patient to the dentist.
I want to change gears a second, and maybe this is something that you're going to go into at Tarbell. This week, Donald Trump announced a new HHS secretary, a former pharmaceutical guy, Alex Azar, and I'm curious, do you know him, and two, what do you think of him?
I don't know him personally, but I know quite a bit about him, and I know some of the organizations that he's been a part of. He came from Lilly, one of the big drug companies, and it looks as if, from our research, he may be the first ever HHS secretary to come straight out of a pharmaceutical company. He was an officer, I think treasurer of this organization called the Healthcare Leadership Council, which is not something that most people know about, but it's this little-known organization in Washington that comprises pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies and big hospital chains and medical device manufacturers that works to try to make sure that whatever change is proposed benefits those companies far more than the rest of us. And he also was a part of the National Association of Manufacturers. I know that organization because I used to work with them too when I was in my old job. They're often the organization that's very willing to carry water for the big insurance companies and others. So I'm very troubled by his background, not only at Lilly, but some of the other organizations that I know very much about and how those organizations have worked to try to thwart positive change.
Any chance drug prices come down under, and I know this is kind of one of those really dumb questions, but I got to throw it out anyway. Any chance, as the president said, he's going to lead the bringing down of drug prices, being someone who was a former drug pusher, if you will?
I see no evidence that there's any likelihood of that happening. In fact, during his time at Lilly, we saw some big increases in drug prices. Under his tenure there, they went in the opposite direction rather than doing anything to bring prices down. And one of the things he said was he would like to see insurers and pharmaceutical companies work together in the private sector to bring costs down. Well, what have we been having for the last 50 years? Why haven't they done it? What more do they need to do? And he's in this organization, this Healthcare Leadership Council, where he is sitting across the table with insurers on a regular basis. Why hasn't it happened? I just think that's a bunch of baloney.
I'm right there with you. I mean, we keep hearing this over and over again. The wonders of the free market and how competition and all this are going to bring prices down. It just hasn't seemed to work, especially when you're talking about healthcare or drugs. It's amazing stuff to me. So let me ask you a last question I've got on this launch. How can people sign up? What can we do to get folks to sign up with Tarbell and make sure that this is a successful launch and a successful venture?
Well, thank you, Rick. Go to tarbell.org, tarbell.org. It's org because we're a nonprofit, and to help us launch and thrive, we hope you'll take a look and donate. All donations are tax deductible. So take a look, consider it, and tell your friends about it. And at the very least, pay attention to the news. Watch what we're going to be rolling out, and you'll see kind of information that we're going to be putting out there that people just will not be seeing anywhere else.
I'm looking forward to it. Wendell, I appreciate you taking time for us. Love to have you come back again real soon.
We'd love to, Rick. Thanks very much.
Good stuff. Thank you so much. And again, take a look at the website, tarbell.org. I'm looking forward to anything that says we're going to go just below the surface and really have a substantive discussion about issues and get away from the clickbait and the popularity and all of that stuff. I think it's a good idea. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith. This History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. Working women from around the nation founded the National Women's Trade Union League in Boston. The organization's founders included female reformers, working-class women, as well as women from wealthy families. The purpose of the organization was to assist in the organization of women wage workers into trade unions and thereby to help them secure conditions necessary for healthful and efficient work and to obtain a just reward for such work. One of the inspirations for the Women's Trade Union League was the work of Settlement House organizer Jane Addams. The Women's Trade Union League recognized that women across economic classes were united by what they called the bonds of womanhood. Wealthy League members donated money to the cause. They often served as spokeswomen and arranged for legal representation for workers when necessary. When the League was founded, the trade union movement was male-dominated. The male trade unionists worried more women in the labor market would drive down men's wages. Often union leaders were unwilling to allow women into their ranks. The Women's Trade Union League was one of the primary organizers of female garment workers, particularly in New York City and Chicago. The League was a key supporter of the 1909 New York City Shirtwaist Workers' Strike, also known as the Uprising of 20,000. The League was also a vocal advocate for the women's suffrage movement. The Women's Trade Union League disbanded in 1950, and in 1974, the Coalition of Labor Union Women was founded in Chicago to continue the fight to ensure women have a voice in the labor movement. However, women workers still earn about 80 cents on the dollar compared with men. The work of the Women's Trade Union League remains unfinished. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Just a day job, someone's got to do. It's kinda hard when everyone looks up to you. Try to make it look easy, gonna make it look good, like anybody would. I'm just your average, ordinary, everyday
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, a new Quinnipiac poll out today points out that only 4 in 10 registered voters think that Donald Trump is fit to hold office. And again, partisan divide. You go back to that divided nation frame. 86% of self-identified Republicans say he's our guy, A-OK, fit to be president. 93% of Democrats say no, not fit at all. 57% of us overall say not fit to hold office. Again, 60% of independents, and that's the bellwether. I mean, you're always going to have the divide. The Republicans are always going to say their guy's good. The Democrats are always going to say their guy's good. Although, to be honest, the Democrats more than the Republicans would say their guy's not. Just throwing that out there. Interesting, some other numbers. African Americans, 93% say he's unfit. Hispanics, 70%. White voters, however, kind of split right down the middle. 49% saying he is fit. 48% saying not so much. And again, it goes back to that whole how divided we are as a nation. And to me, it's mind-blowing that you could look at the guy in office and say, yep, he's fit for it. Really, over his head in so many ways. And this trip overseas, again, highlights the fact that he is so far out of his depth. This stuff may work for being a real estate agent, the relationship stuff, the gags, and not as president of these United States. Now, do you remember? I guess it's about a month ago now that Vice President Mike Pence went to Indianapolis to watch the Colts game, just so that he could leave. And you remember the stunt? Him and his wife showed up, and they told the reporters, "Stay in the van. Not going to be long." Which again is one of those things, really, but told the pool reporters, "Just stay put. We'll be back real soon." They went in. They feigned the outrage, and they left. Well, Crew, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, they have pointed out that thanks to that little stunt, it cost the police department in Indianapolis $14,163.35. So just for that little stunt, it cost the local police. Now, you think about Trump going to Florida all the time. You think about him going to New Jersey all the time. And what we don't think about is how much local costs that racks up. In fact, the people in Palm Beach are going, "Hey, you might want to stay away. You're killing our budgets." Now, add that $14,163.35 to the more than $242,000 that it took to fly from Las Vegas to Indianapolis, pull your stunt, and then fly all the way back to Los Angeles. And you've got a pretty big chunk of change. I would have been much happier had Mike Pence just put someone with a little GoPro videotaped him in his hotel room in Las Vegas, and with maybe all of the, never mind, not gonna go there, because Mike Pence will not be alone in a room with a woman without his wife being there. Leave it to my wife to throw that in there. But here's the thing. Had he just, pretended that, he was outraged in the hotel room, watched it on TV, we would have saved a whole boatload of money. Really. But I guess there's not a good photo op that comes along with that, is there? There's no way for that to actually, I don't know, work in a way that we're gonna be really outraged. And I keep coming back to these games and the shiny things and the political theater that this administration is masterful at. This was going to be the guy, again, like George W. Bush, who was going to be the uniter guy. He was going to bring us together, yet everything that he does seems to be ripping us further and further apart. And, at some point, I look at the trip to China. The trip to China, to me, is one of those moments where you go, which Trump are we talking about? Because if you remember the entire campaign, it was China this and China that and China. It was crazy. And look, I agree with him on a lot of the China positions. I actually do. I think they manipulate their currency. I think they dump. I think they break every rule that is in place, and we let them get away with it for a plethora of reasons. You know, one being it's mostly multinational U.S. corporations who are over there, and they lobby us, and they're the ones who've done this. So this idea, and I love how Trump puts it, well, it's past administrations. You know, it's Clinton and it's Obama. And you go, wait a second. While I agree that Clinton screwed things up with permanent normal trade relations, and I agree that, you know, George W. Bush screwed things up too, and I agree that Obama didn't do anything to make it any better, blaming them is not necessarily how we got into this mess. This was what lobbyists wanted. This is what corporate America was dying for: cheap labor. They wanted cheap, disposable, exploitable labor so that they could make huge profits. And now the problem is corporations are now going, uh-oh, I think we've screwed up, because guess what? China wasn't thinking, hey, just come and use our labor and you know, pollute our environment. They were going, how can we rule the world? You know, this wasn't Mexico. This isn't Sri Lanka. This isn't Bangladesh. This isn't any of those developing third world countries where you can just go in, pay off a tin pot dictator, and, oh, by the way, rule everything that's going on. No. The Chinese are a hell of a lot smarter. They're saying, oh, yeah, bring all your stuff here. We'll retro-engineer it, and then we'll produce the exact same thing and undercut you and put you out of business, which is what they've been doing. Which is why you heard, you know, some of the, within the TPP, the talks about, you know, intellectual property and about patents and all of that stuff, because corporate America is going, oops, we're now getting crushed. Our greed allowed us to get ourselves crushed. And you know, at what point do you go, shame on you, good on you, you know, the heck with you? Now, you had Trump in China, though. Look, during the campaign, again, one of the things I agreed with, and I've said this before, I didn't actually believe Hillary wouldn't pursue the TPP. I believe that eventually something TPP-like would have passed. You go back to that campaign, though, and he was railing on China. And yet he goes over there, and in the face of an authoritarian leader, he is effusive with praise and actually blames us, the victim, if you will, for being victimized. And look, there's part of me that goes, we're the dumb ones, yes. Should have never gotten into this mess. Should have never done it. But again, it comes back to this free trade ideology that the right started pushing, and then the right started pushing it for the reason of cheap exploitable labor. The left got onto it because, hey, you know, we can fight poverty and we can raise all boats. Well, guess what? In a lot of these places where we have these agreements and all these jobs have fled to, their lives aren't much better. And I know conservatives will tell you, well, you know, before they had no jobs and now they at least got jobs. Suicide nets in the hallways at Foxconn. I don't know that suicide nets, I don't know that you can make an argument that that's better. Just kind of a thought. And you look at this and you again come back to what the president did over there. Effusive with praise for this authoritarian leader, and then said it's our fault. You know, good for them. You know, the Chinese are smart. You know, they screwed us because we let them. And I keep trying to find some of his supporters who, one, have seen that, and what their reaction is, and most of them don't, because they don't pay attention to anything other than Fox News, and Fox News definitely didn't play that. So you throw up your hands, you go, what do you do? Because evidently nothing's happening on the trade front with China. I seem to remember currency manipulator, day one. Guess that's not happening, huh? It's crazy stuff. Crazy, crazy stuff. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, talk media news. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. People come to talk.
Trees are green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1978. That was the day OSHA published its lead standard. The standard reduced the permissible exposure by 75% to protect nearly 1 million workers from damage to nervous, urinary, and reproductive systems. As early as 1908, Alice Hamilton, the mother of occupational medicine, noted that lead had endangered workers as far back as the first half-century after Christ. In their book, Deceit and Denial, The Deadly Politics of Industrial Pollution, historians Gerald Markowitz and David Rosner add that, throughout her distinguished career, Hamilton was deeply involved in uncovering the relationship between lead and disease in the American workforce. Hamilton's groundbreaking research on the effects of lead paved the way for a growing uproar against its continued use. After the Occupational Safety and Health Act passed in 1970, occupational and public health activists pushed hard for a lead standard. A new generation of industrial hygienists emphasized how unsound, industry-driven conclusions regarding safe lead levels impacted women workers and workers of color. Industry had long asserted that women and African Americans were simply more susceptible to lead poison, which served to justify discrimination in hiring. Some unions accepted these terms, if only to demand a stringent lead standard that included immediate implementation of engineering controls. But leading hygienists like Gene Stellman blasted these arguments. Stellman insisted such conclusions reflected racial and gender bias rather than any credible scientific evidence. She added that men, women, and children, regardless of race or ethnicity, were all adversely affected by lead exposure. The final standard adopted was considered a compromise. Discrimination in hiring has continued and enforcement proves difficult. But even a watered-down standard was too much for the lead industry. They have been fighting it ever since. So USA Today is reporting that the Army has, well, I guess changed their mind on some things, and I guess they're going to allow people with a history of self-mutilation, bipolar disorder, depression, and drug and alcohol abuse to get some kind of waivers. And here to fill us in on what is that, I've asked Lori Lewis to come talk with us. She's with Talk Media News. Lori, thanks for taking time for us.
Of course.
So what is this? I mean, I see John McCain has come out and thrown his thoughts in. What's going on?
Yeah, so USA Today reported this Monday. What's going on is that the Army changed its recruiting policy in August such that a complete ban on people that have a history of self-mutilation, mood disorder, substance abuse can now apply for a enlistment waiver, meaning that they could still join the military. And you know, we can have debates over whether this is good or bad policy, but Senator John McCain today cautioned against it. The Army responded to not McCain's comments, but the USA Today report saying that there still are vetting procedures. You know, this is a waiver. It's you know, it's not a change of rule. It's a waiver. But yeah, so McCain cautioned against it today. And
now, because you know, I would think, you know, number of the people that I've known over the years who have been in the military say that drug and alcohol abuse is a problem to begin with. So maybe keeping people out of the military who have a history of drug and alcohol abuse is probably not a bad idea, though.
Yeah, I actually don't know what the science is here in terms of what trajectories look like if people, you know, maybe, I mean, we know what that looks like for like alcohol abuse. But in terms of like mental health disorders, or like particular among this is a history of self-mutilation. And I really don't know if like somebody maybe who cuts themselves when they're 13 years old is any more mentally disturbed when they're 18 years old. I don't know what those statistics are, but yeah, we could probably infer some things.
Yeah, but at the end of it, I mean, I look at this most recent shooting. of this guy in Texas who, to be honest, I don't know, but maybe some better screening of some of the people that we're pulling into the military, I don't know, might be a better idea.
Totally. Yeah, totally. But I guess we're talking about two very blanketed ideas here. And I'm by no means advocating on behalf of the military right now in their change of policy. I'm just trying to think of it from a different point of view. There could be people who at a young age have some sort of behaviors that are cleared up by their age, or there could be people like Devin Patrick Kelly, the guy that killed 26 people in Sutherland Springs, Texas, who have a history of mental illness that persists and gets worse.
I think about maybe, and I know this is probably way off the idea, but maybe the thought is if you have people who are doing these kind of mutilation things and bipolar and all this, maybe the military is a good place for them because, well, there's a place for them.
Yeah, but I guess there's a place for them. I think that there's still a place for people who have substance abuse problems. They don't have to go to the military. But
no, when I was a kid, when I was a young kid, it was one of the options that judges always gave you. Anytime you screwed up, and again, I was a young kid at the time, and I knew people this happened to. You'd go before the judge, and the judge would say, "Well, you were drunk driving, or you whatever you did." It was either you can go to jail or you can go to the military. So am I getting kind of the sense that this is opening this up to maybe part of that? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Maybe the DOJ and the DOD are collaborating on something. I haven't heard anything about that or seen any glimpse of that. Well, but I will say though, I think that the military has evolved. Part of the reason why this is so shocking is because we've had such a long conversation at this point about how this is, the all volunteer force. It's a professional army. So a change like this seems to be going in the opposite direction. So,
right. So the other part of this then is it we're having problems recruiting people, which is why maybe they're opening it up to, well, let's go after people that maybe we didn't first go around.
So that's what this USA Today report alleges, referencing that the Army still needs thousands of slots to fill to meet its recruiting goals. The Army itself has denied this and said that that's not what it's about. But, he said, she said.
Yeah.
The Army does need to fill a lot of slots that hasn't filled. That reporting from USA Today, is
well, look, if we're a war nation, we need warriors, right? If we're going to continue our interventionist policies around the world, we need people who are going to go and do it, right?
Yeah, and yes, the military doesn't seem to be shrinking. We have people in Congress who want a bigger military. They want to rebuild the military. They see it as being eroded. They also want to evolve it. But while they're evolving it right now, is like what it kind of looks like is that they're evolving it into something new, but also leaving it as something somewhat old. So you're having different sorts of warriors. And one thing that's interesting, I'll just note real quick, the Army right now is training up these brigades that are going to, there's 6 of them in training. The first one is going to come from Fort Benning in Georgia. And what they're going to be is they're going to be like the skeleton of a brigade that you can deploy somewhere in the world and it will train local soldiers. So it's, a specific unit just for that, to provide a skeleton to train an army. So interesting, changing military. We are doing some of that right now, but this is the first time it's going to be really institutionalized.
Wow. Well, we'll see how that works out. Oh, let's move on. I understand that there are some photos and some images that the Russians have put out of I guess, ISIS movements. Is that true?
Yeah. So the Russian Ministry of Defense today published images saying that they had irrefutable evidence that the U.S. was collaborating with ISIS in Syria. And the photos are said to show a November 9th images of an ISIS convoy leaving its stronghold in eastern Syria. But what was interesting here is Russia published this along with an account of what the images showed. But within, no time at all of them being online, social media got to it and exposed that the images were actually screenshots of videos and video games from the past.
Well, they took video game screenshots, and those are the troops.
There was actually a video game screenshot. That wasn't all of them, but there was actually a video game screenshot. Yeah.
So they're just trolling.
I don't know. Maybe it's part of the strategy. I'm not a Russian expert.
Yeah, or maybe this is, they're mad at Trump for claiming that he asked Putin about did the Russians hack into our system, and maybe, who knows? Who
knows? But I will say, though, this isn't the first time Russia has done something like this, which is interesting, right? All nations have their influence campaigns. This is how Russia conducts some of theirs.
All right, video games.
Video games. In one instance, and I will mention this one, in 2015, it had been alleged that Russia, or people on the ground said Russia bombed a mosque. And then Russia said, no, we didn't bomb that mosque, and proceeded to show an image of a different mosque and insist that it was the different mosque.
Yeah, I can see that. Sure. Look, I mean, it's like any lie. You tell it enough, somebody might believe it.
Yeah.
There you go. Interesting stuff. Lori, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you.
Thank you.
Our good friend Lori Lewis, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back.
From UN headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. China and a coalition of Southeast Asian countries are pledging to mediate their way out of the crisis in the South China Sea. Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte said Tuesday that Beijing had promised to one day adhere to a code of conduct over its behavior in the contested ocean. And yet that code of conduct could take years to negotiate. And countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and the U.S. remain nervous China won't stop developing military bases as negotiations drag on. A political crisis in the African nation of Zimbabwe continues to worsen. At the center of the story is 93-year-old President Robert Mugabe, who's led Zimbabwe since 1980. Last week, Mugabe fired his vice president and his rumored successor, provoking the country's military in the process. On Tuesday, the Associated Press reported seeing tanks heading toward the capital, Harare. That report sparked speculation that the military in Zimbabwe was planning to intervene to stop President Mugabe, but so far no intervention has taken place. And President Trump dined on shark fin soup during his visit to Vietnam over the weekend. That fact has angered conservationists who decry the consumption of shark fin, noting that sharks often have their fins cut off by fishermen before being tossed back into the ocean. But since sharks need fins to swim, the injured animals often die from their injuries. Trump is no stranger to controversy over shark fins. The meat was served at his Atlantic City casino as recently as 2013, and when confronted on the issue, he unapologetically tweeted that he was, quote, just not a fan of sharks. The U.S. Congress passed a law in 2010 regulating the shark fin industry, but kept loopholes in place to allow the delicacy to still be served in the United States. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMedia.com.
Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So, I was at Donald Trump's Twitter page, watching some of the propaganda videos of his trip, and I think one of the things that the world has learned in watching this trip, if you applaud him, if you say nice things, you treat him nicely, he's going to smile and he's going to go along, and he's going to play the clown. I'm wow. I mean, it's just I'm literally stumped in watching. I can't imagine what the rest of the world thinks. I mean, I hope that they look at this guy and don't think that he's us. I know he's our leader. I know he's the guy who's the president of the United States. But for the one thing I think Obama did really well is with the rest of the world tap down some of the American kind of image, made us seem, somewhat sane, rational, decent. The fact that this guy is our representative around the world, I'm really just, I'm just wow. Hopefully not much longer though. I mean, if you saw today's hearings, it's going to be very interesting. And in the next hour, we're going to talk about Jeffy. We're going to talk with Sarah Kendzior about the big hearing today. And well, you know what? Did Jeffy move himself closer to perjury? Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith